So I've actually been wanting to make this video for a while. I've had this product sitting on my shelf for months because I got it before I went on a trip, but then decided that I really wanted to do a whole unboxing intro for talking about this product in specific. And it really helps with doing stuff like what I'm doing right now is talking to my camera, talking to you guys. So I want to make a small little intro for it, so just give me 1 second. This may not look great. I'm just really trying to spin the box in a fancy movement, so maybe it looks good in post if I mess with the speed ramping, but yeah, worst case, it's just gonna be me spinning the box, kind of looking like an idiot, but that's what art is. It's trying different things, dropping things, spinning them, hoping for the best. I present to you guys the Switchpod. Now what this is kind of a special tool made for people who vlog or talk to their cameras a lot. And it's basically a very small tripod that allows you to open and close it and then be able to hold it nicely in your hand. It's got these ridges that your fingers can just slide right over, so it feels nice and secured. And then there's even like holes in the middle that you can basically weave your fingers into, maybe even clip things to if you really needed to, but it basically allows you to be talking to your camera with your hand. And let's say we're gonna sit down at a table, we can basically just slide it open, put it down, and keeps everything nice and still and balanced. And I got this because of the reasons why I just mentioned, because a lot of the times when I try to sit my small Joby tripod right down, I always have to fix the legs, which gets really agitating when you're trying to just sit down and go. Alright, so I put my other camera body on the camera, so just kind of to show you what this looks like. So if I'm talking on the go and I'm just talking to my camera, then I sit down at a bench and I want to just plop my camera down without having to worry about taking a second to set up the tripod. All I gotta do is open it, put it straight down, and then it's nice and even for me. So looking at this thing more closely, you can see that there's no actual head to take off this and put on your camera. So this little screw you just line up with the bottom hole on your camera, plop your camera on, and then you twist this bottom piece right here to tighten and loosen the screw to keep the hold on your camera. So there's the hole, there's the tripod. Make sure it's nice and tight. And then there, we're all set to go. Seems to be pretty safe. So the two most common tripods you see when people are vlogging is using a Switchpod or a Joby Gorillapod. Now there's pluses and minuses to each one, and they both excel at different things. One's better at just standard vlogging, the other is better at getting unique camera angles. So I'm gonna just go over the differences between the two tripods and how they excel in certain areas and how they have challenges that you can either work around or you just have to give up completely and use the other one. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are the tripod heads in particular. So starting from the top, I would say the Switchpod has a huge advantage because you don't have a separate piece you need to attach. You just put your camera on the top, and then you got a screw right here in the bottom already built into the tripod, so you don't have to worry about fumbling around for something. Whereas with the Joby, you have to make sure that you have some other key or device to put the tripod on, because you'll notice when you take the top off, you still have a ring you need to screw on. Then when it comes to talking about the legs of the two different tripods, when it comes to the overall feel in your hand, the Switchpod definitely has an early lead because you can easily form your fingers around the legs as I was mentioning earlier, and when all three are collapsed together, it's about the width of my thumb. And then even when they're all the way out, you can still easily hold it with one hand, and since it's all made of metal and it's not gonna move, this would be fine to walk with your camera even if you didn't have all three legs condensed. But then when it comes to the Joby, it's hard because you can't really hold this with one hand because the camera's going to cause the tripod to crumble like this. And then we've got all legs straight. It feels awkward to hold, like you don't have enough support or like grip around the tripod itself, so it's going to feel awkward carrying it. I'm just going to put my camera on each one to just kind of show you what I mean. So now when it comes to discussing these two tripods in the field, there's a few rules of thumb that you want to keep in mind. I know you're just inching for some more content. So there's a few rules that you want to keep in mind to try to use these tools efficiently. So the one big disadvantage that the Switchpod has is that it needs a whole surface to be able to use it without holding it. And what I mean by that is when all three legs are condensed, you can't just leave it alone because it's going to fall. So it has to be fully deployed. And if you just roughly measure out the distance between each leg, it's about 10 by 10, so you need 100 square inches of space to make sure you can use this and set it up without touching it. So then when it comes to the legs of the Joby pod, you have a huge advantage and then even a huge disadvantage, kind of depending on how you're set up. So sometimes your Joby pod could take up even less space than the Switchpod, but then you have to like remember that these balls all have to be perfectly aligned that make up the legs, or then your tripod's just gonna fall over because it's too heavy for one leg to support. So sometimes it can end up being wider than the Switchpod, or it can end up being narrower than the Switchpod. But then I'll show you what happens when you actually put a camera body on the Joby pod. So I'm having a little bit of difficulty trying to show you the extent to how difficult the Joby pod can be when you put it down on the table. And that's because right now my camera is not as heavy as it normally is when it's vlogging. Typically the lens is a lot bigger and heavier, then you have the microphone on top, so none of the weight is balanced correctly. So unless you have it perfectly balanced on the Joby pod itself, if one leg is out of place, the whole tripod's gonna fall over. If you're trying to angle it down to get a very up close shot, the lens will most likely cause the tripod to fall over itself, or it's going to cause the whole thing to just slide back. So the real thing is basically the Joby pod struggles. You have to keep all the legs straight before you put your tripod down. We're going to pretend there's a camera on here. I just took it off to make it easier. But you got to make sure these are all straight. And then even if you do make sure they're all straight, sometimes you put it down and then you have to readjust it. Or then the camera could be so heavy that it just causes the tripod to slowly just fall as you're recording, which is a huge frustration. Now, what the Joby pod actually takes a huge advantage over the Switchpod is if you have a subject that you're trying to get a recording of or a picture of, and the Switchpod can only shoot from one kind of angle, where the Joby pod can be moved all around and be latched onto things the Switchpod would never have the ability to latch onto itself. So as you can see in that example, the Joby pod has a lot more flexibility when it comes to getting different shots and angles. When you do have to basically hand hold the Switchpod, even though there is post-production stuff to help you get a nice smooth motion, you just have to be holding your camera the whole time instead of just being able to set up a tripod and make sure it's 100% still. This last part is just going to be talking about putting each of these tripods in your travel camera bag in case you needed to go and shoot somewhere that's not your home. So what your typical bag looks like is this. So I'm just going to show you what it's going to be like putting these tripods in your bag when it's full versus when it's empty. Now, as a disclaimer, I'm aware that when most people travel, they have another bag besides their travel bag that they can easily put one of these tripods into, because since it's not a camera in itself, it doesn't necessarily need to be protected. It doesn't even really have to come with you if you're going on a plane. It doesn't have to be up top. It can be down below with your luggage. because it's not gonna break, you can easily just put it in a carry-on bag or an underneath bag. It doesn't have to be in your camera bag. So here's a very empty open camera bag. This is just what my camera bag looks like right now since I've taken a bunch of things out of it just to rearrange and clean. I'm just gonna show you what it looks like trying to put the Switchpod into this. And as you can see, you can put it in most parts of the bag. We even move around the flaps to make sure it fits perfectly. So with an empty camera bag, the Switchpod does kind of have its limitations, but with the Joby pod, you can literally put this thing anywhere you want to. And when I say anywhere you want to, anywhere that's big enough where it can be bent into shape to fit perfectly. Here's our makeshift full camera bag. So if you're trying to figure out where to put the Switchpod, you have very limited options, it looks like. So it really looks like the only place you could put it is on top of your camera. Because every other place you try to put it, it just wouldn't fit. Or you could try to keep it on top of everything, and then when you close the bag, you might just risk having a bump. Now when it comes to the Joby pod, you still have the same advantage where you can bend it into any kind of shape you want to fit it anywhere in the bag. So then when it comes down to traveling, using either the Joby pod or the Switchpod, it's probably best to think about where you're actually going to be and what you're going to be doing. If you're in a place you're going to be doing a lot of handheld vlogging and have a lot of flat surfaces to be able to sit down at, the Switchpod will most likely be better, so that way you can go from walking and talking to sitting down quickly without having to fumble with the tripod. But if you're going to be in a place that has a lot of odd end surfaces, maybe you don't know if it's going to be balanced or flat at all, the Joby pod will be better to travel with, because even though it might take you a second to sit down and fix all the legs, you'll most likely be able to put this on more surfaces than not. It will allow you to get more custom angles than versus having the Switchpod, which really only has one flat angle. Now to summarize all the points I was trying to make, the differences between the Switchpod and the Joby pod when we're talking about the tripod head. The Switchpod definitely has the advantage. I'm filming on it, by the way, so I can't show you, but all you have to do is put your camera on the top and screw it in through the bottom. Whereas with the Joby pod, you have to take a piece off the top, so you have a separate head that you have to be conscious about. And then you need to bring along a separate tool to make sure that you can then screw it onto the bottom of your camera. Then when it comes to talking about the tripod legs, the Switchpod is a lot easier to hold in your hand and fits ergonomically better. And you can hold all three legs or just one leg and it feels stable enough. Whereas with the Gorillapod or Joby pod, it feels very clunky and doesn't feel fantastic in your hand. And then if you're trying to use only one of the legs, you have to make sure you grip it from the top or the camera is gonna fall. Because if you grip it from the bottom, the camera is most likely gonna fall, as I showed earlier. And then one of the problems is when you're holding it from the top like this, you have your camera stretched out, you're feeling it more in your forearm than versus actually feeling it in your arm when you typically hold a camera for vlogging. When it comes to the creative shots, the Joby pod definitely has the advantage because every single part of the leg is movable. You can do any kind of position you want and film from any angle because it also has the ball head feature. Whereas the Switchpod, it's just flat and you can't angle it at all, so all the angles you're going to try to get with the Switchpod have to be handheld. And then the final piece is when it comes to traveling, as I said in the disclaimer earlier, you can easily just have one of these in a different bag if you have more space. When it comes to fitting in the camera bag specifically, the Joby pod has a slight advantage because it can be bent into different shape. But as you saw earlier, the Switchpod does fit in the compartment that holds just your camera. So I'm kind of in a hairy situation right now because I don't really know where my lens cap is and I'm trying to wrap this up real quickly. So just to tie everything together, I'm just gonna flip you guys off. That really didn't work, but it looks like I did find my lens cap, so I'll see you guys later.